Step into a world where creativity knows no bounds with Trakell Art Supplies. Specializing in premium brushes, panels, and brush care, we're here to fuel your artistic journey. Exclusively for Artbeat listeners, enjoy 20% off your purchase with code ARTBEAT20, plus free shipping on orders over $124.99 and a complimentary brush with every order. Dive into our woman-led, innovation-driven collection before June 20th, 2024 to seize this offer. Restrictions apply. Amplify your creativity with Trakell, where your artistry is our passion. Explore more at trakell.com and let's create something extraordinary together.
Welcome to Artbeat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. Today, we sit with Alex Garant, whose heart attack at 30 became a moment of reckoning, propelling her into a life of purpose and moving from the complacency of everyday routines to embracing each day with intent. Alex shares the evolution of her distinctive style, where traditional portraiture intertwines with optical art, and we navigate the labyrinthine world of the Canadian art scene. Join us for a glimpse into the mind of an artist painting with the urgency of someone who knows the value of every heartbeat. Alex, hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I am great. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you. Season 2, Episode 1.
Woo woo.
Alex, I'm wondering if we can talk about the moment that you knew you were going to be an artist and maybe tell us what some of your earliest influences were.
I started really early to be immersed into art and drawings and painting. My mother was an artist and she always had tons of art supplies at home. So I was always kind of playing with it. So it was something that I was just surrounded with very young. And when I was about 7, my parents sent me to a class at the local community center for an oil painting class. So I actually took my first oil painting class when I was 7. It was really young, and I still have it here. I guess my mom kept it in the attic for a few years, and for when I say a few years, for a few decades, she gave it back to me. So I have my first oil paintings here when I was 7. So I started really young, and I guess it was always something I just did as an activity, as a hobby, as a pastime when I was very little. Yeah, I guess art is just something that was just following me through my entire life, that kind of just been around naturally.
And when did you realize that you wanted to pursue art?
It's a good question because I feel like because I was so much into art, like, I was that art kid with the sketchbook, like, in high school in the bus drawing weird eyes in the corner of it. I was totally that kid. So I feel like it was something that was always kind of expected from me. So I'm not even sure it's an active decision that I made. I know that when I was in high school, I was doing really well on an academic level, and I was considering other stuff, like even like medicine and all kind of different options for college. And I remember my mother telling me, like, no, you need to go to art school. And which is really strange. I feel like usually it's the opposite. The kid wants to be an artist. The parents will be like, you should be a doctor. But in my case, my parents being a bit of 70s hippies, they really kind of let me follow the artist dream and stuff like that. So then I went to art school. It wasn't an active decision. I would say it was just kind of implied most of my life. But it was something that as I grew up, though, I kind of let go of for many, many years when I was an actual adult. I had a lot of corporate jobs. I had a lot of all kind of different careers. I feel like they're all different lives that I lived before I actually committed as being an artist as a career, which I think is like a different maybe step, which is not just, oh, I'm an artist, I do art, but hey, let's financially be an artist. You know what I mean?
What was it that made you decide to commit to art full time?
So when I turned 30, I had a heart attack. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it did change my life. It was this big awakening call of, oh my goodness, what have I done with my life? What are my life regrets? it obviously brought up a huge moment of introspection. I feel like when you're at that, almost like you're looking at that tunnel, with the light at the end and the flashback of your life. None of the regrets that you have are based on stuff that you didn't do, on stuff that you did, excuse me. Like none of the regrets are based on stuff that you did. All your regrets are based on stuff you didn't do. All the stuff that, I should have done this. Should I call my grandparents more? I should have, talked to so-and-so more. I should have gone there. I should have traveled more. And when I was at the hospital, in the ER before I was stabilized, I wrote a letter for myself and I made a list of all the different things that I needed to do if I get out. Like if I survive this, what should change? And the first thing I wrote on the list is I need to do more art. I need to go back to my passion. I need to go back to my true love, in a sense. And I kind of just knew that art needed to be the focus of my life going forward, that I spent too much time just kind of going where life was taking me without a true purpose. So that was this big awakening moment for me, which, I mean, it sounds like such a cliche, right? It's such a, this big life event happened, you think you're going to die, and suddenly you wake up and you're just like, oh my goodness, I need to do this with my life. But it's so true. Like, it's so true. So unfortunate that so many people have to go through one of those events to realize what is important to them.
How did that life-changing event reshape your approach to art and creativity?
I think what changed the most is the intensity with which I would approach art, and also change my level of commitment. So before, art was more something I would do on the side. So I would have had so many different jobs. Like I was a clown for kids' birthday party. I worked as a makeup artist. I was a flight attendant. I work in the corporate world. Like I had so many different jobs, and drawing was always there, but it was always a hobby. And I think this moment was just like, hey, let's commit. Let's change direction and start living with purpose. Let's not just, the comparison I always talk about is life is like a lazy river. And before, I was more on one of those big floaty thing. And I was just, living life like, whoo, the river is taking me there. Okay. And just go with what was offered to me, or, oh, this is a good opportunity. Okay, sure, I'll go this way. So after the heart attack, I decided I need to be the captain of my ship, Make decision. I need to decide where I'm going. It's great to be open-minded about what life offers, but it's also really healthy to take control and have tangible goals. So that changed the way I would just live my life, but also changed the level of intensity. I was suddenly living without fear, especially when you're an artist. You always think, when I get better, I'll apply to galleries, for example. If I can create 6 paintings, then I'll apply to galleries. Oh, I'll take a course, and once my technique is good enough, I'll show it to people. And then after my event, it was just that fear was not there anymore. It was that sense of urgency of, oh my goodness, I need to do it now because I may not have tomorrow. Completely shifted what I was more careful about in my life. That fear factor was not important anymore. It was more about, we have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose. What's the worst that could happen? I could die. Done that, been there. And what's next? So I feel like it really changed, like the purpose of my decisions, and also the intensity that I would feel when actually going through with those decisions.
So what happened next after you made the decision to focus full time on art? Like, what did your days begin to look like? How did you start fully committing to this?
Well, because I was working, when that happened, I was working in advertising. So I had a great career at a corporate level. I was working in marketing and advertising. So I understood that the financial burden of being an artist is, a true factor of an art career. So I decided to first commit to spending a lot more time on my art and saying, okay, once again, what are my priorities? What are those decisions I'm making for myself? So it's about, let's watch less TV. Let's work at night. Let's get a studio and work. And what I did is I was renting a house back then. And the house had a 1 bedroom and a little den. And I took the bedroom stuff, transferred it to the small den, and made the master bedroom my actual studio. So there was a bit of a commitment in space, but also in time. And it was also about, during the weekend, let's go out less. Let's spend more time actually working on the art, once again, with purpose. And commit the time with an active goal in mind, which for me, I knew coming from the marketing background that brand is everything. So a lot of my focus came onto, okay, how do I establish my visual brand? Let's focus on my voice. Let's go through some exercises to understand who I am as an artist, and how do I become very self-aware of my creative habits and integrate those with purpose in my upcoming work in order to produce a very cohesive collection. So it was about, the space, the time, and just having overall like a strategy when it comes to committing to a visual voice.
What did your art start to look like at that time?
The idea was to take a big step back. The idea was to produce a lot, but take a step back and understanding what my patterns are as an artist. There's some elements that always kind of came back in my work, even my early work, even art school 20 years ago. It was, symmetry, patterns, duplicating images. Those are some elements that always came back, even in my early work. A more rigid composition. So what I did when I was working through my exercise of finding my style was to really create as many pieces as possible and really take the time to identify those patterns. And like I said, a lot of it was about symmetry and duplicating some elements. And from there, when I was able to see those patterns that kept coming back from piece to piece to piece, the next step was to take those elements and then integrate them with purpose in the upcoming work. So not just kind of follow my instincts, but just add intention and purpose in those patterns and those elements that keeps naturally occurring when I create.
And how has that evolved and changed over time?
I think that as you feel more and more comfortable with how you express yourself visually, I feel there's two things that happen. One, what you do create with intent becomes sharper, not literally, but it becomes more the focus of your work, and it becomes more what is the most important part of the art visually. And you also get rid of a lot of what I'm going to call the fluff. So, which is sometimes outside influences. It could be inspiration of the moment. Like, oh, I know like pink is trendy right now and I'm integrating it in my backgrounds this month. Or like, it could be a pop culture reference of, I'm going to do a portrait of this actor. Those are just kind of examples. But as you work as an artist, I feel like your visual voice becomes more and more niche. So you are more specific with the images that you produce, and you also kind of let go of all of those external influences that kind of, I'm going to say murk, but, murk intention behind your own work.
In what ways did that newfound dedication to your art influence other areas of your life?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking there's probably people in my life that thought I was suddenly very, very intense. the failing was not an option. And I think that it also reflected in who I am as a person, which is someone that maybe at some point in my life was more shy, or would get embarrassed a bit more easily. And suddenly I was someone who didn't want to apologize for anything, right? More about being myself, being okay with being myself, and just overall, with the self-awareness came the self-acceptance, I think. I mean, I'm not saying that everything I'm doing is always great and perfect. I'm and we all make a lot of mistakes, but I think it's about a lot about forgiving ourselves and always kind of moving forward. And I think that's what I took away from my practice, but also like my life experiences so far, was just to be who you want to be and not apologize to anyone about it, while remaining respectful to the world, obviously.
When you fully committed to art at that time, did it help you overcome other challenges in your life?
A heart attack did leave a bit of PTSD, and I think it's part of the recovery process, which is, you know, uh, that fear of, oh my goodness, I could die anytime now. I could die tomorrow, which is something that pushes you to act faster and make decisions faster and commit to things faster. But it's also something that is terrifying, because it's almost that fear, oh, I could die tomorrow, and it's always kind of looming behind everything great. So there was some aspect of it that, of my journey, that were challenging. But yeah, it's like, I guess the commitment to the art was this hope of, can I do what I love for a living? So it's, you got to embrace the fear, but you also have to embrace the hope and holding on to what you love and what you love doing. Because, I mean, there's something very magical in being able to do what you love for a living, like financially, or even as a hobby, be able to spend time committing to what you love doing. Yeah, I think my life and my practice kind of changed from like both like a positive and a bit of, for a while, a negative aspect. But eventually that negativity kind of fades away as you just forget that you can die, and you now think that you can live forever.
Did you have to find a balance soon after? Like, did you find yourself being really super intense at 5,000% and, burning out?
Oh no, I went full speed ahead. Absolutely burnt out. Uh, I was, like I said, I was maintaining a very strict schedule for myself. I was working every single evening on my painting. I was working every weekend on my painting. I was starting to be picked up by galleries, so now I had deadlines and commitment, and I was still juggling the corporate life. And I was moving up into the corporate world and very committing to the rat race. And eventually everything came crashing, because I had enough art commitment to do art full time, but I was still maintaining what we call, air quote, the day job. The day job was taking so much from me. It was very stressful. At that time, I was an advertising executive. I was in charge of, millions of dollars in sales. I was doing budget, like the big, big corporate job. So it was, I reached a point where I was physically getting ill from overcommitting to, I will say, like my two different lives, the art life and the corporate life. So much I started feeling sick physically. And at some point I was starting to get chest pain from the stress. And this is where I started thinking, okay, this is scaring me once again. Like because of my history, something happened at the, air quote, day job, where I had a conflict with someone. And then I was like, you know what? I'm out. It was the good old cliche, I am out. I'm giving you 2 weeks notice, and those going to be vacation time. And I just kind of walked out, and that was it. And then I just committed to the art life full time. I was prepared for that moment, I would say, because for people that listen say, yeah, it's scary to just kind of quit the safety of the steady job. But I did prepare myself before. I spent many, many months, putting all my little pennies aside and making sure that I had some money aside when I would be ready to quit the corporate job, and I had a decent amount of commitment for my art career. So I knew that I was ready, that if, the day that I was ready to leave, everything would be kind of set up to help me optimize my life as an artist for a little bit. So yeah, when I quit the corporate job, I was like, that's it, walked out. And the morning after, I woke up in my house and I thought, well, I better start painting now.
I want to talk a bit about your evolution of your artistic style because you are known very distinctively as the Queen of Double Eyes. What can you tell us about how you developed this very unique approach, and maybe what was the inspiration?
A lot of it came from exploring what my natural artistic tendencies are. Some of the things I mentioned, which is I really like patterns. I really like duplicating elements. I do like a very symmetrical aesthetic. I'm naturally attracted to order when it comes to art. So I took those elements and I sat in my studio and I thought, how can I push this further and further? And the process was very analog, meaning it was playing with sketches and transparency paper and vellum paper and putting stuff one on top of another, and really kind of embracing the tangible process of playing with the sketch and how to evolve it and push a concept further and further. So once I started overlapping my images, I felt like it was such a strong reflection of where I was in life. The concept originally was about creating that vibrancy that represented life itself. After everything that happened, it was about the movement of it and bringing movement into an art piece, and also creating an experience for the viewer. And a lot of people look at my art and they say, ooh, I can't focus. I like that aspect of it. It becomes a bit of a visual investigation for the viewers, that it's about exploring the image and not just looking at the image. So I did a few pieces with that concept, and I felt like it really truly represented what I was trying to say with my visual voice. So I just kept pushing the concept further and further. There was different, obviously, phases where I would add some backgrounds or remove the backgrounds, and do we duplicate the clothing or not the clothing? So over the years, it's all about refining that idea and pushing the concept. It took different meanings over the years. So if I talk about my art now, it's more about how we have different personas, and those personas are battling one another, and the art is a reflection of that. These days, I'm really exploring the universe of dreams and how who we are in our dreams, or the character that we play in our dreams, is that our true self? Is it a reflection of who we are? And how does that persona exist within our conscious persona? So I like to explore those concepts. And even if the style is the same, there's truly an evolution in hopefully the refinement of the technique, but also the meaning as it keeps evolving and changing.
How do you translate these concepts onto the canvas with your optical art technique?
It's funny how it works. I feel like sometimes the image leads the story, but sometimes the story leads the image. What I mean by that is sometimes an advancement in technique will change the story. Like the way you integrate something, like right now, I'm really into, I call them like cloudscapes, which there's more of a dreamy element. And it started as me pursuing a different aesthetic and trying to pursue a bit more of a contextual element for my work without giving too much clues to how or where the characters exist. So I was pursuing a contextual element that would present those characters into that dreamy state. So the technique and the visual goal kind of change the narrative of the character, but the reverse can also be true, which is you could create a piece and it's all about the storytelling. And then the storytelling will be guiding what the visual result is. So if you decide, it happens a lot, I feel, with theme shows, or if there's shows with a specific title in, let's say, it could be, do a piece inspired by folklore or fables, then, that theme might push your aesthetic in a different way, which is also kind of an interesting challenge as an artist when the idea of the subject comes from the outside, because there's always something to learn, I feel like, as an artist, and it can come from a request on the outside, but it also can come from yourself giving a story to those characters.
Quite often on social media, you show the parts of the process of your paintings. Can you talk our listeners through a bit and what that looks like?
I feel like the biggest challenge when it comes to my work is the planning. Just because of the nature of my work, there's almost a formula to it in order to get that vibrating effect. So I believe that the most important part of my step, or the most important part of my, I want to say formula, but that's not the right word. The most important step of my magical. I'm so French right now. I'm only thinking about French words. So I think the most important part of my process is actually the sketching. I really like that part of just putting the idea on paper and looking through my reference files and trying to find, the right body language and the right image I can use as a reference, and just kind of build the idea from there. And I like my sketch to be very, very specific and very, very clear. Then I'll transfer, obviously, the sketch onto canvas. And from there, this is where I allow myself to have a bit more freedom, because I'm not necessarily committed to a specific color or even texture. So that will be more how I feel that day, or like the overall feeling I want for the piece. So that I allow myself a freedom when it comes to, like I said, color and texture, but the sketch and the form is really the basis of my concept. So that's really important for me. So sketch, very specific sketch, then transfer into canvas. And after that, when I start applying paint, I like to work with an alla prima technique, which is wet on wet, but not necessarily in a traditional way. A lot of alla prima paintings are done where you apply all of your color at once. So let's say you put all your dark down for the entire painting, and then you put all of your light colors down, and then you kind of work on the whole painting at once. Because of the time it takes me to work, I call it wet on wet, almost like puzzle making, which I work on one little section at a time, but that section will be built wet on wet. So I'll work on, let's say, the left side of the face, wet on wet, and then the day after, I'll spend the day working on the right side of the face, wet on wet. And it's always like almost like patchwork, where I'm putting all those pieces together, all those sections together one by one.
Did you face any challenges in terms of blending traditional portraiture with graphic elements?
I think it just kind of came naturally as I was developing my style. Obviously, the portrait aspect of it, you can keep learning how to make things more realistic, and you can work on your form, and you can work on your tones and your shadows and all those aspects of a painting. So I do have the tendency to gravitate towards a more traditional technique when it comes to the faces and the skin. I do have the tendency, if I'm analyzing my own work, to work a bit more loose when it comes to clothing and be a bit more expressive with that. I also feel like it's also something that is kind of unique to the direction I'm thinking, which is the part that we see blurry, which is the part I'm duplicating if people are familiar with my work. The part that we see blurry, actually the part that I have more details put in, where the attention is given. And the parts that might appear a bit sharper are the parts where there's actually less detail. So it's kind of interesting play on the technique versus the final effect.
What were some of the initial experimental phases you went through before settling on your current style?
Obviously, when I was younger, you experiment with a lot of different medium, especially those years in art school where you do sculpture, you do digital work. Though back in the day, digital work was not very advanced. I don't want to, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough that it wasn't great. So so I obviously have a bit of experience with a lot of different medium, and I had a chance to, play with clay and metal and acrylic and watercolor. And, in my youth, obviously it was so much coloring pencil. And as I worked, I felt like oil paint is what serves the imagery the best. I actually think that oil is actually one of the easiest medium to play with now. I feel like in a way, it's very forgiving because it keeps moving and you can almost sculpt the paint because you can keep moving it, you can keep adding to it, you can make it lighter, you can make it darker. So I find it very forgiving in the way that it moves on the canvas. So there was for sure experimentation in my younger years, but I feel like I believe I found oil paint fairly early in my experimentation, which I knew the medium that I wanted to embrace for my work. I find it easier to work with. At the end of the day, that's where the commitment comes from. It's easy to work with.
How has your approach to creating op art evolved over the years?
It's all about understanding the intent of evolution. And what I mean by that is once you commit to a certain aesthetic, it's almost about how many variation can you do. But it's not necessarily about, we hear about artists, they always paint the same thing over and over again. I almost get offended when I hear that because it's such a challenge as an artist to commit to a visual voice, but it's such a pleasure to keep finding variation for it. And I personally just kind of love it. Like, I love the idea of having a style that is very unique and very mine, and just keep exploring it. Like, how far can I push it? What can I change that still is very much my aesthetic, but at another level? I feel like it's such a pleasure to just keep pushing and pushing how far we can take things. I believe in holding on to one aspect of our visual aesthetic and then finding thousands of variation on it. It's such a fun journey. Like, I truly enjoy that. Just keep pushing and pushing and pushing an idea to, like, how far can the idea be pushed, right? So I love that concept when it comes to having a brain or having an art voice or something like that.
When you say that you like to push your work, what does that mean?
I don't know if people see it as much as I see it. Because a lot of it is about how do I push myself as an artist? Like, is it tweaking my technique? Is it, right now I'm really big into dual portraits, which is more than one characters coexist together. And to me, it seems like such a simple thing, like, just add another character. But to me, it was such a shift because the idea behind the painting was to stare at one person. So I kind of, by adding another character, I'm like, am I changing the entire storytelling behind my pieces? So it's about pushing an idea, like, do I add a character? Is it changing my story? Is it changing the storytelling behind my pieces? But also it's about pushing yourself, I think, on a technical level. I feel like as artists, we learn something with every new painting. And I strongly believe this is the reason why most artists hate most of their previous work. For me, I like the piece I'm currently working on. Everything I've done before, I don't love it anymore. The reason is because we learn something. At every single new piece, we learn something new. So when you look back at your previous work, you don't see that element that you just learned. You're like, I learned how to, master cadmium red for cheeks, whatever it can be. And then it's really present in my current work. But if I look at all my paintings before, that element is not there. Therefore, it's not on par with the work I'm currently do. So I feel like there's always a struggle being like, oh, you need to embrace where you were because the work can still be good, even if you learn something new since. But I feel like it's such a reason to keep pushing yourself because you keep learning something new and you can apply that to all the upcoming work that you have planned. You need to embrace it. And it can be a struggle sometimes.
Where does the character inspiration come from?
Great question. I do have a database of photos that I save on my computer. What I used to do a lot is actually book a model to come to my studio, and I would take 300 pictures. Like I would book a model for an hour, and I would take about 300 photos. Like I'll make them sit one way, and I would say slowly turn the other way, and I would just snap, 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 and then I would change the lighting, and then we'll do it again. When it comes to, the literal inspiration, I do have a great database of reference photos that I keep on my computer. So that helps me a lot. Even if I end up shifting, facial features, or if I end up changing, hair and clothing, those things are just kind of details and add-ons after the poses when it comes to portraits. So I have that database, but when it comes to the expression of that character, I'm always searching for an innocence. I like that idea of innocence. I like the idea of being a bit awkward, those characters to be a little bit uncomfortable, to kind of sit. And my vision of my characters is always that they're kind of sitting for this really awkward studio portrait photo shoot. And they have that, the gaze and the idea of that they have to be seated there and being analyzed and being viewed by the viewers. So I'm always looking for that girlhood transcendence and that idea of that awkwardness that comes with, us changing and evolving as humans. So there's an emotion that I'm looking for when I'm planning those portraits and when I'm trying to come up with faces. So they're not really real people anymore. Modify the faces a lot, and I change features a lot. And it's more about the feeling and the expression and just that emotional idea of staring at those characters that basically are the most important part of choosing what they're going to visually look like.
Do you think that there are misconceptions that people have about optical art?
So the OP art movement is something that was really present in the 60s and the 70s, which was originally abstract art, a form of abstract art that was about repeating patterns and about, I've seen a few pieces in museums, which is, using analog material, create those illusion of, you look at those 100 black squares and you see white dots appearing, like the idea of playing with the eyes. The word OP art was really used for this form of art before, which was more patterns and, art that plays tricks on your eyes. And I kind of coined the phrase OP figurative art because I was really trying to replicate the idea of playing with the eyes and tricking our eyes and our vision, but really combining it with old school portraits. So I feel like I'm using the term OP art maybe loosely if I was talking to a purist, but it's a really good way, and I think, to make people understand the type of art that I'm doing. So I feel like op art and figurative together is a concept that I'm exploring, but it's, once again, it's not originally how the term was used, but I kind of coined the phrase to kind of try to explain to people what kind of art I do, because it wasn't always easy to kind of explain before stuff like glitch art was mentioned, which obviously came with technology, but because I started before the technology was there, it was a bit harder to kind of explain. Oh yeah, like I'm taking images and then they kind of move and they kind of look like, so it was the wording and how to explain to people what I do was a bit trickier.
How do you balance complexity and accessibility in your art?
I mean, once again, I think the complexity of the art itself, like the literal complexity of the art piece, does contradict the simplicity of the poses of what makes the image in the first place. And I think that's a dual concept that's interesting to explore, which is you have a very simple image, which could be a very simple portrait, and then you making it so much more complex. You're making it into something that is not a traditional portrait, but you make it a different experience for the viewer, which is not about, oh, look, she painted someone pretty, or look, she painted someone, or hey, this is a portrait of so and so. And it becomes so much more about exploring the effect of the painting on yourself. Like, am I trying to see one person? Should I cross eyes and try to understand the pictures? So I think the complexity of it is more about the experience than the picture itself.
You briefly referenced messaging earlier, but what is it that you would like for your viewers to take away?
It's a great question. This question is actually the reason why before I would completely avoid contextual clues in my background. I really wanted the character to live on their own so the viewer can make up their own story for the character. So it was really important before that it would be almost like a staring contest between the viewer and the character that's painted. So it would really be all about the viewer. It's all about the viewer experience. It's all about how it makes them feel. It's all about how they view the character. Now I'm adding a bit more clues or elements into my background. And I talked about this recent series I'm doing this year about the cloudscapes. So I'm trying to bring a bit more of an emotional connection to the pieces, adding that dreamy element, adding that femininity, adding this element of dream and fantasy to it. So the storytelling element is a bit more present this year than in my previous pieces. So I feel like I'm trying not to impose what I think to the viewers and the collectors, to be honest with you. I want to talk about what they represent to me and where they live in my head, but it's a fine line between, telling you, oh, this person is named this name and she sits there because so and just letting the collectors kind of interpret it the way they want to be. The place where they live in my head right now is between dream and reality. And if I can bring that sense of almost positive confusion to the viewer, I feel like I succeeded. Like, I want people to view the art and experience it. And sometimes it's a great experience, sometimes it's a confusing experience, but I want people to feel something, and I want people to do more than just view the art. So at the end of the day, if someone look at my art and feel something, regardless of what those feelings are, I feel like I succeeded. And I want to be careful not to impose too much of the story I made up in my mind for those characters into the viewers. I still want it to be very open to interpretation. But there is some elements, obviously, that keep coming back. That sense of dream and innocence and beauty in a way that I hope that people feel when they view the art. But the storytelling itself, completely up for interpretation.
Why is it that you want to leave that out?
Because people should connect with art the way they want to connect. As much as I want people to understand me and understand my voice, I want to be open to what they see. I never want to be someone who see my work and say, hey, I see this. I see happiness. I see my childhood, or I see despair. And I never wanted, they're never wrong. They cannot be wrong because it's a projection of their own feelings when they're looking at art. And even if I'm the artist, who am I to tell them, no, that's not what you're seeing? So I think there's a synergy and a co I don't want to say codependency when it comes to, the art experience when it comes to my work, which is the emotions that people feel very much depend on what they view, but what they view completely depend of who they are themselves and what their life experience is. So I really want to leave that open to like, what does my art make you feel? And it could be completely different than the person sitting next to you, but you're still right. So I won't allow people to be right about how they view my work.
What made you decide to shift into including more descript elements compared to before?
I guess I'm trying to be, and that's, I guess, a word I use a few times, but it's always about intent, right? I'm a strong believer in self-awareness and intent. I wanted to make some elements a bit more obvious. I think that's an interesting journey for my characters to do have more contextual clues. They can be, once again, interpreted many, many different ways, but I think it's an interesting journey for my art to present clues into, do they live in a dream world, or is it very much more of a scientific experiment, which is, let's try to make our eyes move. So I think it adds a kind of an element of intent from the artist. I'm trying to embrace that a little bit more, to bring more intent, to be maybe more specific with the emotions that I'm presenting. It's funny because you create the work as an artist, you create the work, and sometimes, someone asks you a question about like we're having this conversation right now, and it's pushing me to question myself, like, why am I doing this? Which is good, because sometimes we do stuff based on what's happening in our life, and we don't even realize why we're doing it. So I think talking about art is always great because it adds such a level of introspection to the work.
How do you see your style evolving over the next few years?
It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? As much as I know that I want to keep pushing my ideas and I want to keep pushing the concept of optical figurative art, I don't know. To be honest, if I'm being very candid here, I don't know where this journey is going to take me. I know that I want to explore larger scales. I'm very interested in working on extremely large scale and see how much details I can add on. So that's more a challenge on a technical standpoint, where I would like to work on a larger scales. I want to see how the actual elements of the painting, like how the body language could change of the character if I can display them on a larger scale. So that's an interesting challenge. I know I want to keep pushing myself, once again, how skin tone is used, how sometimes how I paint hair. Maybe I want to explore different techniques. So there's always a challenge when it comes to technique and scale, which is great to explore as well as an artist. Like, as soon as someone has the opportunity to work really big, like, take it. It's so fun as an artist to work big. So I think that's something I want to explore when it comes to the subject of my painting. I don't think there will be a departure when it comes to that sense of innocence that I'm trying to portray, and that gaze into girlhood. I think I want to keep exploring those subjects. So I just see myself pushing more onto the complexity of the pieces in the future. Yeah. And there's always an interesting fashion influence as well, where I'm not trying to be trendy, for example, in the clothing that I put on my characters. I'm trying to be a bit more timeless, so I can see myself explore some trend confusion with the fashion that's present in the presentation of the characters as well.
You collaborate a lot with brands and on projects. How do you choose?
I'm a strong believer in working with brands and people that match your personal value. We, as artists, are business owners. At the same time, our business is so personal and close to our heart because we pour our soul into those canvas, and then we go around trying to market our soul to people. So it's such a personal process. So I feel like if you do want to collaborate with brands, you have to make sure that it's a good fit, and you have to know that it's okay to say no if something is not a great fit. And I had a few brand collaboration, and I choose them carefully, and I want to make sure that they align with my business objective, but they also align with my personal value. One of the brand that I started collaborating with this year is Trikel, which is a brand that I adore. I used their panels before and I used their brushes before, and I'm so excited to now be part of their pro team. That's a brand that I feel really proud to be associated with because I use their product. I believe in their product. It's just a great team, like a team that believes in their people. They believe in artists and they believe in promoting the artist. So I feel like this is a great example of a brand collaboration that makes sense for me on a business standpoint, but also on a personal standpoint, which I totally identify with their core values.
You have some upcoming exhibitions. What would you say that our audiences can expect from your shows at Haven and then with Harmon Projects?
Yeah, so I have a show opening this summer at Haven Gallery, in 2025 at Harmon's Project in New York. Most of the pieces will be part of that journey of exploring those cloudscapes and dreamscapes and bringing my characters into a different type of adventure. So I think that's what people can expect, maybe more interesting colors that they've seen from me before, more of those contextual elements, more dual characters, portrait as well. So I feel like it's a kind of a next step into, I personally think, I'm hoping that a more interesting and more dynamic version of my work.
How do you decide on the theme for a solo exhibition?
I approached it two different ways before. There's some times where I came up with a show title and I just produced the pieces based on that show title, based on that concept. I feel like right now I'm creating pieces that are naturally cohesive. And at the end, it's more about looking at the entire body of work and finding a title that truly embrace all of the pieces, like finding that umbrella sentence or word that could really fit for all of the pieces. So yeah, I think there's two ways to approach a solo show. Like right now, I'm really painting with my heart. I'm really painting with my own entertainment in mind. And so those pieces are coming together in a very cohesive way, which is embracing that dreamy landscape and, like I said before, like that girlhood awkwardness that I really, really like.
Alex, I want to get your perspective on the Canadian and international art scene because you're currently in the US, but you do split your time, between Toronto and where you are there. So how does the art scene in Canada compare to places like New York, because you've been active in both of these areas?
It's a controversial question. From my experience, I feel like the international scene embrace artists a little bit more than the Canadian scene. And this is controversial. And, you're the specialist in the Canadian art scene. So tell us what you think. What I see is I'm Canadian, I'm French Canadian. I'm a very proud Canadian. And I've shown in Canada. And when I started my career, I was showing in Canada a lot. But my print sales, for example, are always been mostly in the United States. In Australia, I do great in Australia. I feel like the rest of the world embrace art collecting a little bit more than Canadian. From what I've seen, if I'm looking at my stats throughout my career, once again, being Canadian, lived in Canada basically my entire life, and yet when I look at my sales history and my shows and everything, I feel like my career was embraced more in the United States and Australia, or even Japan and Germany. I've seen some nice trends in Germany and in Japan lately. And it's interesting to me how, I don't know where culturally, where I feel like in New York, in California, you're an artist, everybody shows up at the art opening. People buy prints so much. People buy so much prints. People buy original. I can see how art collecting is really a hobby for people. People are actively building art collections. And obviously it happens in Canada as well. It could just be me, but I've seen that from a lot of other Canadian artists that become like huge, like in the States and in other places in the world and other market. They really make it. And they basically live in Canada, but live from the sales made in a different country, including the United States. So why? I don't know. Is it a cultural thing? I don't know. You can probably tell me. It's interesting, but honestly, at the end of the day, and that's something I'll tell any artist is go where people want you, right? Like if let's say it doesn't matter if you're from a small town in Calgary or a big city or you're the Atlantic Canada. If you have an opportunity to sell somewhere else, just do it. Like find your people. And the world is so small now, with the internet and social media and website and, virtual galleries, and all galleries have website now. Like the world is so small. You can really sell and show anywhere in the world. So I always tell artists, show wherever you want it. Like your community, your small town doesn't want you. Doesn't matter. Go wherever you want it. Go where your people are, and your people will find you. And I think that's a great thing. But yeah, it's an interesting, as much as I obviously love Canada, very proud Canadian, very proud Québécoise from Quebec. There's some bubbles of creativity. I feel like Montreal is a great market. Toronto is okay. I feel like there's great pockets of art and curator and art directors that are really kind of embracing the current art scenes. There's a lot of markets that I feel are really stuck into maybe what art used to be in Canada a few decades ago. But I'm actually going to ask you a question. Because you talk with a lot of Canadian artists, do you feel like this is true?
100%.
Yes.
And it's a conversation that we have on the podcast, that we have off the podcast, when I'm meeting with artists at shows. And the consensus is that the majority of the time, an artist has to be recognized elsewhere before they're recognized in their own home country. And it seems that it isn't particularly that way anywhere else. And a conversation that I had recently with an artist, they equated it to...
Is it a cultural thing? Is it
Yeah. I think it is a cultural thing. It's almost as if we don't trust ourselves to know what we like and what we don't like. And so we look to external sources to validate what we should like and should not like. And another aspect of that, in that conversation I had with that artist, actually it's Wei Lam, he was on an episode a couple of weeks ago. He brought up a very good point, which is, we do a lot around hockey in Canada in promoting and fostering culturally hockey players. It is widely accepted. It is widely revered as, if you can, become a hockey player. And yet when it comes to other fields, especially the creative fields, whether that is music or fashion or design, like architecture, the arts, for whatever reason, culturally, we don't seem to have the same strength that we put into promoting these activities for new generations and old generations. And so the idea that we had at the end of this was more or less, it would take a very big cultural mindset shift for this to be remedied.
It's an interesting point about how valid art is, because art is so subjective, right? So I do understand that confidence into, like, do I buy this artist? Like, is this artist really good? Yes, they made it somewhere else, therefore they're good here. But shouldn't that be, I want original art in my home? I feel like that the shifting point should be about, like, I know a lot of Americans that have original arts in their home, that have original paintings, that buy paintings from, artists to put in their home. And I know a lot of Canadians that buy art at Home Sense and IKEA, So is it because art is not seen as an investment in Canada? I feel like maybe in America, you see those auctions with those, profits that can be made out of reselling art. The secondary art market maybe is stronger. Maybe we need to believe in the actual value of the art and how art, gain values over time. So I think maybe there's education to be made into, like if you do build an art collection, it could be worth a lot of money. So it seems like it's a very maybe drastic way to look at it, like making it all about the money. But, at the end of the day, artists want to sell their work to collectors. Buy from multiple artists. Like when you start collecting art, it's a bit of an addiction. Like people buy a lot of art. I own a lot of original art and I love it. But yeah, I think maybe there's a cultural shift to be done about how we invest our money as well. Yeah, buying art is an investment and there is a value to it beyond, hey, this is something pretty to hang in our house. There's something about financially practical about it that could be an investment that can bring back something in the future. I don't know. It's very interesting. I also think that this tourist that comes to Canada and they buy a lot of Canadiana type of art, which is, a great also, but is it what's expected also from people? Like, do we expect Canadian artists to be very about promoting Canada into their art? Or is something like movement like the lowbrow or once again, that figurative storytelling type art that is really huge in the States when it comes to more like the pop art influence. It's almost like it never really picked up back in Canada compared to other markets.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. And I think there are a myriad of resolves that can be taken, but I feel like it would have to be taken collectively.
I don't know. Maybe it's just about putting money into artists via grants, but also putting money into convincing people that art collecting is great for the economy.
Alex, what's next for you?
A lot of shows. I have shows booked up until 2026. So you'll see me around the United States and Australia, and you'll see me be very busy, keep producing a lot of work, and just hopefully sharing all of it on my social media. And that's about it. Just work in my future.
And where can our listeners find your work?
So, there's my website, which is alexgarant.com, and I list all my upcoming exhibitions on there. And obviously, all of my social media, it's all the same handle, which is Alex Garant Art. I'm on all the cool stuff where the youth is. So, the TikTok, the Instagram, all the stuff. Rediscovering Pinterest lately. So, I can be found over there and sharing my work. And I have this little group on Instagram as well, which people can join the conversation, and I share more insights of what's happening behind the studio. So yeah, this is where you can find me overall.
Well, Alex, I'm so happy that you came on the podcast today, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully everybody can understand my French accent and everything. But I'm looking forward to part 2 in the future.
Absolutely. We will definitely do that. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Artbeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at Artbeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.